I would say Old Growth Project is kind of like a space of discovery. The exhibition is kind of like a space of discovery where it's an open archive that contains reproductions of hundreds of pages of his work that ranges from 1970s all the way to the early 2000s, and they kind of create a visual arc in terms of not only the content, but also the creative experimentation.
For my part, I had to, not that I was looking for somebody, but had to feel comfortable with you personally and as a professional in order to sort of say, here are boxes of materials that I have selected over the last 40 years, and please enjoy, open it up, look through it. I mean, who knows what sort of things one can find in the box that we've been saving for 40 years, right? So there was a real basis of trust that was really important. In terms of the actual selection of the work in the show, that is that's where it moves from studio through your hands into gallery space.
And I don't think that process, like my process of selecting specific pieces, was structured in any particular way. It was much more intuitive, and it was, I mean, I had some sense of certain things that I felt were important to include. For instance, the culturally modified trees drawing series, that was important to include, and also you know, the drawings of tree stumps. And I saw recurring motifs as I was going through numerous, probably it went through a couple thousand drawings, and there were certain patterns that emerged out of it, and I wanted to kind of retain that sense of repetition.
The political work that is in the exhibit in Old Growth is of a different time, and the audience for that work was ourselves. We were talking to ourselves in a very intimate way ourselves in the community on the island. We weren't talking to the Lower Mainland, and we weren't particularly interested in having that conversation in part because there was no vehicle easily available for us to sort of express who we were as Indigenous peoples. And so it was somehow easy to put the complex political message in a little box, because I could use shortcuts. I could use code in terms of our dialect.
What's important is to remember that the materials in Old Growth, they have had very specific audiences for whatever you created, but it's also evident in the way it is drawn that certain kinds of audience is interpolated. So for instance, the earlier work, it's directed more towards your community, where people understand certain issues. So it takes a certain look, whereas in the later work, you have different sensibility in terms of how you want to visually create the narratives.
Unfortunately, those issues remain. I mean, even though we're talking about work that is decades old, from the dusty archives, we are still wrestling with this dangerous idea of taking oil tankers and allowing them to sort of weave their way through some of the most high-energy coastlines of the Pacific. And so those are the issues we're dealing with in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and I have to say that every time that issue has come up, it has been defeated. This is not the first time this proposal has come up, and it's been defeated, and I hope it's defeated again. Unfortunately, it's still here. But in terms of the content of the current work, it is less about honing in on a very sort of political issue, an oil tanker issue or whatever, but it's more about that relationship between self and other, that which we see ourselves that which we see outside of ourselves. It's the same issue, but it's more personalized because the audience is slightly different. That borderline, it's that sharp edge, it's that comic book panel, and how do we describe time and space between different elements of the narrative we're exploring. And in one way, the classic comic book is that hard-edged very sort of crisp, rectangular, urban planner's layout, which has got the great white space in between, as if everything outside of our story goes in. So that's why I use the form line, which is a Heidegger construct, and I've used that undulating bigness and smallness, and it's sort of stretching out of giving space form and dimension, and allowing it not only to describe our little narrative, which is contained within it, but also to allow time and space to have its own narrative. It expands and it contracts, and it has a relationship, sometimes dominant, sometimes lesser than. The relationship between the narrative that's contained and the form line that is the container changes. Neither one drives the other. They require each other to exist. Like you were saying, Liz, we have created time and space as a practical tool to help us navigate this experience. And sometimes it's big and drives the story a little bit, and sometimes we're big and we drive the story a little bit. But the two need to commingle. They need to have this dance, this push-pull relationship. I very, very seldom have a script that I'm working with. There are examples where I do, such as read a Haida manga. It's 108 pages, and it's a very complex piece, and I had to work with the script because it's based on an oral narrative. But for a standalone piece, a much smaller piece, I'll just start doing the work. I'll get that brush slopping across the paper and just see what comes out of it. And it seems that what's really enjoyable is when I find that initial moment when I can get all the clutter and chatter out of my mind. And there's a little visual image that goes with that, and that is of a large brush. Imagine it, circumference in the barrel or something like this, and with the bristles at the end, but it's empty. And when I can sort of find myself as an empty brush and nothing in there, it allows the ink to come in. It allows something to come in and flow out the end of the bristles, and then my mind starts kicking in, saying, "Oh, that's kind of neat. Turn this way upside down, backwards, and whatever," and things start coming out, and then narrative does start to come out. And it's interesting that what I'm doing is once the narrative starts appearing, the conscious narrative on the page, I will often do something to completely remove it, turn it around. It's called a rotation. I call it a rotational series. And so I'm always tricking myself. You're getting yourself in there. Let's do that. And what I'm hoping happens at the other end is that the observer sees the work. Let's say it's a piece of work hanging on the wall, and there is little to indicate where the proper horizon is. There is a minimal reference to the authority of the artist. To any authority for that matter, I guess, is what I'm really trying to get to. I want to get to a place where people decide, I think I like that, like this, or like that. And welcoming people, individuals, to take control of themselves, to question it, and not to be looking at a painting and say, the painter has signed his name at the lower right-hand corner, therefore this is up, this is down. And I sign all the corners, actually. I initial here, and I'll flip it, and I'll put my little archiving number on it, and I'll put a title there, and then I might put another little thing there. And it's really to have people understand that when you switch the laws of gravity around, it is not the loss of everything. It is the discovery of something in its own way. There is no diminishment of us as humans. It just gives us a whole other wonderful way to discover the world. Chief Yahgulanaas and his son and a couple other friends, we would go and take these Japanese students out and leave them in the forest for hours on end. So they had these very sort of personal experiences. And it was during these conversations that would take place over these trips, which would last a week or so, that I heard about mangaka, as was a comic book artist, which was a respected profession, and that wasn't the case here at that time. My work in terms of the look of manga is not manga. It's truer to what I understand the definition of manga, which is art without borders. Haida manga is less an effort. There is no effort to try to replicate a Japanese technique, but it is an appreciation. The marriage of Haida and manga helped me locate it for myself. Being blatantly self-serving in the first instance has created these circumstances that have been encouraged by audiences, by gallery goers, by collectors of art. And there seems to be something about get the chatter out of the way and do this little thing that I'm doing here, and if it's true and it feels true for me, it's going to work. The starting point for a relationship to that which is around us is not so hard-edged. It is not such an imposition. And it really is more of an integration and a flexibility in sort of translating that into art. Well, that's something that I feel that I've always scribbled and played around with. Fortunately for me, when I became older, unlike most children, I didn't lose that creative expression. I didn't channel it off or deny it. I just kept playing with it, and I think that comes from within a community that really does value the creation of objects. Suddenly people woke up and saw there's a whole audience and a whole set of questions, important questions and themes that are not being addressed in comic books. And so let's open it up. Let's talk graphic literature. Let's really look at it and see it as a very complex art form. We need to be honest about who we are in terms of relationship to that which is around us.